There is a town called Springfield. Nobody knows where it sits. Nobody knows why the fish in its river have 3 eyes, or why the sky sometimes turns a color that skies are not supposed to turn, or why the same family has been living the same life in the same house for over 30 years without anyone aging a single day. The Simpsons has been on television since 1989, and in that time, it has ended the world more times than most shows attempt in a single season. It has staged nuclear bombs and religious raptures and alien invasions and zombie outbreaks and quiet, devastating futures that arrived not with explosions but with gravestones in the background of scenes that most viewers watched without stopping. Tonight, this video walks slowly through every apocalypse Springfield survived, and then through the dark theories that suggest the town is stranger and sadder than any of those disasters ever made it look. Welcome to Yellow Fan. Let's get started. The day Springfield got nuked. There is something about a nuclear bomb that never fully becomes funny. You can dress it up in yellow cartoon animation, you can put the most lovable buffoon in television history at the center of the story, and you can surround the whole thing with a laugh track and slapstick timing. And somewhere underneath all of that, the thing still lands with a weight that other comedy subjects do not carry. The people who wrote The Simpsons understood this. In season 9, in the episode that would become one of the most talked about Treehouse of Horror segments ever made, they decided to drop a nuclear bomb on Springfield and watch what happened. And what they produced was something that could not be completely contained by its own humor. It kept spilling past the edges of the joke. The segment is called The Omega Man. It is a parody of the 1971 film The Omega Man, which itself was adapted from a Richard Matheson novel about the last surviving human on Earth. The writers chose that specific source material carefully because The Omega Man is a film about profound isolation, about what a person becomes when every social constraint disappears, about how civilization is not really a structure in the world, but a structure inside people, and when the world goes away, that structure sometimes goes with it. They wrapped those ideas inside a Homer Simpson story, which meant they were also wrapping them inside laughter, but the ideas were still there underneath. The setup of The Omega Man begins with a political joke. Mayor Quimby, during a public appearance, makes an offensive comment about France. He calls French people something that translates roughly to snail-sucking surrender monkeys, which is a phrase so casually cruel that it gets a laugh precisely because Quimby delivers it with the practiced ease of a man who has never once worried about consequences. The town of Springfield is entertained. France, however, is not. The French government responds by launching a neutron bomb directly at Springfield. This is the kind of joke the show was extraordinarily good at during this era, where the escalation from minor offense to nuclear strike is played as a logical, almost reasonable progression. Of course France launched a bomb. What else would they do? The rhythm of the joke makes the absurdity feel inevitable. Homer, by complete chance, happens to be in a bomb shelter when the missile lands. He is there because he was considering buying the shelter from a military antiques dealer named Herman, who has one arm and whose shop is one of those recurring Springfield details that the show never fully explains but always manages to make feel consistent. Homer goes into the shelter. The bomb drops. And when Homer emerges into the daylight, Springfield is silent. The show does something very quiet here that takes a moment to register. Homer does not immediately understand what has happened. He gets out of the bomb shelter, gets in his car, pulls up behind another car at a green traffic light, and gets annoyed that the driver in front of him will not go. This is Homer Simpson behavior in its most recognizable form. He is in the ruins of a destroyed city, and his first response is traffic frustration. He gets out of the car and punches the driver in the head. The driver's head turns to dust. Homer assumes he has punched so hard that the person just dissolved, which he takes as a sign that he still has it. He is proud of himself. He then notices the newspaper headline, something to the effect of "Springfield destroyed by French neutron bomb." And slowly, the reality begins to settle over Homer. He is alone. His family is gone. His town is gone. Everyone he knows has been vaporized, or worse. What the writers choose to do with this moment is the most interesting decision in the entire segment. Homer cries. He is briefly, genuinely devastated. The animation gives him a real expression of loss, not a comedic exaggeration of sadness, but something closer to actual grief. And then, within seconds, he recovers. He realizes that if everyone is gone, he can do whatever he wants. The grief evaporates almost instantly. He goes to a movie theater and watches a film he has been meaning to see. He dances naked in a church. He eats at a restaurant and does not pay. He raids a store for the luxury items he has always wanted. The loss of every single person he has ever loved becomes functionally a holiday. This is one of the most specific and quietly devastating things the show ever did with Homer's character, not because it is mean-spirited, but because it is honest about something the show had always known about Homer, that his emotional processing is extremely shallow and extremely fast. He feels things fully and then he stops feeling them. He can experience genuine grief and then pivot to exhilaration within the space of a few seconds without any of that feeling forced or inconsistent for his character. He is not a bad person. He is just someone whose interior life operates on a much shorter timeline than most people's. The freedom of being the last person on Earth suits Homer extraordinarily well. He is almost perfectly adapted to it. He has no responsibilities. He has no job. He has no one to disappoint. The nuclear apocalypse has, in a strange way, removed every source of anxiety from Homer's life and left only the things he enjoys. He gets to eat without judgment. He gets to walk around without pants. He gets to watch whatever he wants on television without anyone changing the channel. Springfield is destroyed, and Homer is fine. The story shifts when Homer, dancing in the church, is confronted by the survivors. It turns out not everyone was killed by the bomb. Many of the town's residents survived, but were mutated. They are now covered in boils and sores, their shapes warped and wrong, their voices carrying a new roughness. Among them are Moe, Ned Flanders, Mr. Burns, Chief Wiggum, Barney, Apu, Sideshow Mel, and most of the other major secondary characters in the show. They are not exactly monsters. They can still speak, still reason, still form sentences, but they look like what radiation does to living things, which the show renders with more specificity than you would expect from a comedy. The mutants explain that they want to build a new society. They have decided to create a world without the mistakes of the past. A perfect society, as Ned Flanders puts it, where freaks and normal people can live together in peace. This is the kind of utopian language that is almost always followed by something terrible, and the mutants do immediately clarify that Homer is considered one of the mistakes of the past and that they intend to kill him. The logic is not wrong. If you are building a new civilization free from past errors, Homer Simpson might reasonably qualify as one of those errors. Homer flees. He gets in his car and drives toward home, chasing and being chased across a Springfield that is now a ruin. The buildings cracked and settling, the streets empty and gray, the whole familiar geography of the town made strange by what has happened to it. When he arrives at his house, he discovers his family inside, alive, unharmed, and unaffected by the radiation. Marge explains that the house was protected by its many layers of lead paint. This is the kind of joke that the show could make in 1997 about old house construction. And it is also a joke about the specific chaos of the Simpson household, which has clearly not been properly maintained for years, and has been instead painted over repeatedly by someone who probably should not have been painting anything. Homer and his family are reunited. The mutants arrive at the house. Ned Flanders, leading the group, sees the reunion and suggests that perhaps they were too hasty. Perhaps they can all live together after all. Perhaps this is the moment where the new society begins, where the old divisions between freaks and normals simply dissolve in the face of human connection. And then Marge and the children pull out shotguns they were hiding behind their backs and open fire on all of the mutants, every one of them. Every named character who survived the nuclear bomb, every face from the cast of recurring Springfield residents. shot and killed by the Simpsons in their own front yard. The family then decides to go steal some Ferraris because the apocalypse is over and there are free Ferraris and no one is using them. The Omega Man works as a comedy. The jokes land. The timing is impeccable. Homer dancing naked in the church is a genuinely funny image. The moment when he punches the dead driver and thinks he has just become extremely strong is one of the best beats in the entire segment. But the thing that makes it stay with you, the thing that makes it worth discussing this many years later, is that it does not entirely diffuse its own darkness. Springfield was destroyed. The entire supporting cast was mutated and then killed. And the family that survived did not survive because they are good or brave or special. They survived because their house was dangerously coated in a toxic material, and because Homer happened to be looking at a bomb shelter at exactly the right moment. That is not a heroic survival story. That is a story about luck and lead paint and the random nature of who makes it through a catastrophe. The show does not comment on this. It just moves on to the Ferraris. There is something in the structure of the Omega Man that the show would return to again and again over its decades of Treehouse of Horror episodes. The idea that the apocalypse is not a dramatic, singular event, but a thing that happens and then, for the people who survive it, simply becomes the new normal. Homer loses everyone he loves, and within minutes is enjoying his freedom. The town is destroyed, and within the episode's runtime, the family is planning their next activity. The disaster does not leave a mark, and in a children's animated show, that might be a comfort. But in a show as long and as self-aware as The Simpsons, there is something subtler happening. The show is describing a particular kind of resilience that might not entirely be a good thing. The ability to not be changed by catastrophe is also the inability to learn from it. The Simpsons survive everything because nothing really sticks to them, and that is either the most comforting thing about the show or the most unsettling, depending on how long you think about it. The nuclear bomb fell on Springfield in season 9. The show had been on the air for 9 years. It would go on for many more, and it would visit the end of the world many more times, and each time it would find a slightly different way to describe the same truth. The apocalypse is not the end of the story. For The Simpsons, it is barely a detour. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Omega Man gave us a Springfield reduced to ash and then rebuilt in the space of a single episode, which tells you something about how the show thinks about disaster. Up next, we go somewhere even stranger because Homer Simpson went to heaven before anyone else in town, and the story of how he got there is one of the most unexpectedly moving things the show ever attempted. Section 2, Homer and the Rapture. Before getting into the episode itself, it helps to understand what the word rapture means to the people who believe in it, because the show handles the concept with more care than you might expect given its usual approach to religion. The rapture is a belief held within certain branches of Christianity that at some point before or during a period of great tribulation, God will physically remove all true believers from the earth. They will simply be lifted up and taken to heaven, leaving the rest of the world behind. The idea generates enormous amounts of anxiety for people who hold it sincerely, because the question of whether you qualify, whether you are faithful enough or good enough or believe the right things in the right way, is essentially unanswerable until the moment it is answered. And the moment it is answered, it is too late to do anything about the result. The theological roots of the rapture belief are worth understanding before examining what the show did with them. The concept draws primarily from a reading of 1 Thessalonians, a letter written by the Apostle Paul, in which he describes believers being caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord. Over centuries of interpretation, this passage became the foundation of an elaborate framework of end times theology, particularly within evangelical Protestant traditions in the United States. The Left Behind novel series, which began publication in 1995 and eventually sold more than 65 million copies, brought the rapture concept into mainstream American cultural consciousness in a way it had not previously occupied. By the time The Simpsons made its rapture episode in 2005, the cultural conversation about the end times was already well underway, and the show was engaging with something that its audience had real feelings about. This context matters because the show's approach to the rapture is noticeably different from its approach to most religious topics. The Simpsons has a complex and occasionally uneven history with religion. The show has mocked evangelical fervor, satirized institutional corruption, treated fundamentalism as a source of absurdity, and explored genuine faith with occasional tenderness. Ned Flanders, the show's most consistently religious character, began as a portrait of sincere belief and gradually became a more complicated figure as the seasons progressed. The show's relationship with God himself has been surprisingly direct. God appears in the show on multiple occasions and is depicted with a warmth and a gentle authority that suggests the writers regarded him as a legitimate presence in the story rather than simply a target. The rapture episode sits within this complicated religious history. It does not arrive as pure satire. It arrives as something stranger and more interesting, a story in which the religious premise is taken seriously enough to actually be staged, with consequences that the narrative then has to figure out what to do with. The story begins simply. Homer, Bart, and Lisa hide in a movie theater after Bart and Lisa's haircuts go badly wrong. The film playing in the theater is called Left Below, which is a parody of the Left Behind franchise. Homer watches Left Below and becomes deeply, sincerely interested in the subject matter. He is not making fun of it. He is genuinely engaged with the idea that the world might be about to end, and that certain people will be taken and others will be left. He starts doing research. Homer's research involves calculating the date of the rapture. He works through biblical texts, numerical sequences, and a variety of sources that the episode does not examine too carefully, and he arrives at a specific date. He is certain. He tells Marge, who does not believe him. He tells his neighbors, most of whom do not believe him either. He stands on a rooftop and warns the town and is largely ignored. This is a pattern the show was very comfortable with in this era. The idea of Homer having a genuine conviction that no one around him takes seriously, and the episode spends some time building the loneliness of that position. What makes Homer's rapture obsession different from his other obsessions across the show's run is the quality of earnestness underneath it. Homer has become invested in fad diets and get-rich schemes and neighborhood projects and 100 other temporary enthusiasms across the show's long history. Most of those enthusiasms are motivated by self-interest. Homer wants something for himself, a shortcut or a pleasure or a status he does not currently have. The rapture obsession is not like that. Homer becomes fixated on the rapture because he is genuinely worried. He does not want to be left behind. More than that, he does not want his family to be left behind. The fear driving his calculations and his rooftop warnings is not a selfish fear, but a parental one. He is afraid of being separated from the people he loves by something he cannot negotiate with or outsmart. This makes Homer's rapture period in the episode a surprisingly touching portrait of a father whose love for his family has taken an unusual form. He cannot protect them from the ordinary dangers of Springfield life in any reliable way. He is not competent at work, not wise in his decisions, not reliable in his commitments. But the thought of a divine sorting mechanism that might separate him from Marge and the children, that operates on criteria he does not understand and cannot appeal to, genuinely frightens him. He responds to that fear the way he responds to most fears, with intense, disorganized, slightly embarrassing action. When the date arrives, Homer goes to a hill overlooking Springfield and waits. And the rapture begins, not in an enormous dramatic way, but genuinely, quietly, and with the specific visual language of religious illustration. People begin ascending. They rise into the air. The sky opens, and Homer watches from his hill, waiting to see if he will be among those called up. He is. Homer Simpson, safety inspector, donut enthusiast, man who has sold his soul for a donut, man who has cheated and lied and let his family down more times than can be counted, Homer Simpson is taken in the rapture. He rises into the sky and arrives in heaven. This moment is worth pausing on because the show does something quietly audacious with it. The rapture in theological tradition is not simply a reward for good behavior. Most frameworks that include it describe it as a matter of genuine faith, of sincere belief in specific theological truths, of a relationship with the divine that is not necessarily correlated with moral excellence. Homer, by any conventional measure, is not a paragon of Christian virtue. He is lazy, selfish, gluttonous, occasionally dishonest, and frequently unkind. And yet the show takes him up. The rapture happens, and Homer is included in it. The implication is never stated directly, which is the right choice, but it is there in the structure of the episode. Homer's faith, however confused and impure and mixed up with donut theology and self-interest and fear, is real enough to count. He believed something sincerely enough to stand on a rooftop and embarrass himself in front of his neighbors. He calculated dates and warned people and went to a hill to wait, not because he wanted to be seen as righteous, but because he genuinely believed it was coming and wanted to be there for his family when it did. That might be a better description of faith than the show ever offers through Ned Flanders, whose religiosity is sometimes more visible than it is felt. Heaven, as the show depicts it, is warm and bright and full of clouds and soft light, and the general aesthetic of a place designed for maximum comfort. Homer is happy there. He gets the things he enjoys. He is at peace. But then he looks down, and he sees what has become of the people he left behind. Marge is in a pool of fire. The children are suffering. Springfield is in the grip of the tribulation, the period of suffering and chaos that, in many theological frameworks, follows the rapture and precedes the final judgment. Homer cannot accept this. He goes to God, who is depicted in the show's gentle, slightly absurd way as a large bearded man with visible feet, one of the recurring visual choices the show made in its portrayal of divine characters. Homer argues with God. He pleads. He explains that he cannot be happy in heaven while his family is suffering below. God is initially resistant. This is, he explains, how it works. This is the plan. The plan has been set in motion, and it runs on its own schedule, and Homer's preferences, however heartfelt, are not part of the calculation. Homer keeps arguing. He is, in heaven, exactly what he has always been on earth, a man with a very simple emotional logic and a very stubborn refusal to accept that the thing he wants is unavailable. He does not argue with theological sophistication. He does not cite scripture or construct elaborate philosophical positions. He simply explains, with the blunt honesty that has always been his most reliable quality, that he cannot be happy if the people he loves are not okay. That is the entirety of his argument, and it is enough. In what might be the most quietly remarkable thing the episode does, God relents. He agrees to postpone the apocalypse, not to cancel it, not to change the outcome, just to delay it, to give everyone a little more time. And Homer descends back to Springfield, which returns to normal, and the episode continues on its regular track as though none of it happened. There is something theologically peculiar about God yielding to Homer's argument that becomes more interesting the longer you sit with it. In most religious frameworks, the end of the world is not negotiable. It is the culmination of a divine plan that operates on timelines and for purposes that exceed human understanding. The idea that Homer Simpson could talk God into a postponement should not work even within the show's comedic logic. And yet the episode makes it work, and the way it makes it work reveals something about the God the show was depicting. The God who relents for Homer is not the God of absolute sovereignty and inscrutable will. He is closer to a parent who is interrupted in the middle of something very large and very serious by a child who has a simple, urgent, genuine need. The plan matters. The plan was always going to happen, but this particular parent is willing to be delayed by a child who is crying not out of fear for himself, but out of love for his family. The postponement is not a theological statement. It is a characterization of what the show thinks God is like, which turns out to be patient in the specific way that parents are patient with children who are frightened and confused and whose love for each other is the most real thing about them. The episode ends with Homer and Marge sitting on the couch, and Homer quietly tells her that he postponed the apocalypse because of her. Marge does not fully believe him. She has spent too many years managing Homer's enthusiasms to take this one entirely seriously. But she is moved anyway, in the way that Marge is always moved by the moments when Homer's love for her breaks through his usual confusion and becomes visible. She does not say much. She does not need to. What lingers about Thank God It's Doomsday is the combination of sincerity and lightness that the show maintained throughout. It is funny. There are good jokes. The supporting cast gets a few good moments. But the episode never quite laughs at the rapture itself. It never quite laughs at Homer's genuine terror about what will happen to his family. The show was capable of enormous meanness, and equally capable of enormous warmth. And this episode falls on the warm side, in a way that is not always recognized when the episode is discussed. The episode was written by Don Payne, who was nominated for a Writers Guild of America award for the script. Don Payne died of bone cancer in 2013. The last time Al Jean, the show's longtime executive producer, saw him before his illness progressed was during the recording of the DVD commentary for this episode. Jean has spoken about this in interviews with a quietness that suggests the memory is not a simple one. Two people sitting in a recording booth, talking about an episode in which someone went to heaven and asked for more time, one of them not knowing yet that time was what he was going to run out of. The rapture as a storytelling concept keeps appearing in the show across its run. The show returned to it in Simpsons Bible Stories, a season 10 episode structured as a series of biblical parables that the family imagines during a church service. At the end of that episode, the church service concludes, and the family walks outside to find that the rapture has occurred in their absence. Springfield is destroyed. The horsemen of the apocalypse are riding through the ruins, and the Flanders family is ascending to heaven. Ned and his sons, Rod and Todd, rise into the air with expressions of perfect calm and joy, because of course they do. Homer tries to catch Lisa before she ascends too, and he does. He pulls her back down. He stops his daughter from entering heaven, and the family stands together in the ruins of Springfield, looking at the stairs descending into hell that have opened before them, and they walk down, together, with something that might almost be cheerfulness. The episode frames this as a joke. The family goes to hell rather than heaven because of who they are, but there is something in the image of them walking down those stairs together, Homer with his arm around Marge, that lands differently if you do not hurry past it. They are not separated. Whatever happens next happens to them as a unit. Going to hell together is still going together, and for a family that has survived every other catastrophe through the specific force of their refusal to be separated, the image carries a warmth that the joke does not entirely consume. The contrast between the Flanders family ascending and the Simpsons descending is the show at its most compressed and most honest. Ned has earned heaven by every measure the show established for his character. He is genuinely good, genuinely faithful, genuinely patient in circumstances that would break most people. His ascension is not a joke. It is the show acknowledging that the work he has done across years of being the better neighbor has its reward. The Simpsons, who have caused him damage and embarrassment and grief in quantities that should have broken him long ago, are not ascending with him. And neither of these facts is played entirely for comedy. Both are played as true. The show kept returning to the end of the world because the end of the world is, strangely, where the show could say the thing it most wanted to say, that the Simpsons, whatever their faults, will face the worst together. The apocalypse is not a threat to the family. It is just another setting they inhabit, the same way they inhabit the living room or the nuclear plant or the church. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Homer went to heaven and asked for more time, and the world agreed to wait. In the next section, we go somewhere significantly darker, because there is a Season 4 Halloween segment in which Bart accidentally raises the dead, and the Springfield zombie apocalypse that follows is more specific and more carefully constructed than anyone remember. Section 3, The Zombie Night That Changed Everything, Season 4, Episode 5. That is where Treehouse of Horror 3 lives in the show's long catalog. It aired on October 29th, 1992. At that point, the show was 4 seasons old, which sounds young, but was actually already old enough to have defined the rules of its own universe with considerable confidence. The writers knew what Springfield was. They knew what the characters were. They had spent 4 seasons establishing the rhythms of Bart's rebellion, Lisa's idealism, Homer's chaotic love, Marge's steady endurance. They understood what the town could hold and what it could not. And in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, which existed outside the show's normal continuity and allowed the writers to do things the regular format never would, they had found a space where they could push everything further without consequence. There is something worth understanding about the Treehouse of Horror format before getting into the specific episode, because the format itself is doing something unusual in the history of television animation. Most animated shows with Halloween specials use the occasion for costume jokes and mild spooky imagery, and a reassuring return to normal by the end. The Simpsons did something different. From the very first Treehouse of Horror in Season 2, the show used its Halloween episodes to engage seriously and affectionately with the horror genre, to borrow the grammar and the visual language of genuine horror storytelling and run its characters through it. The characters could die. The stories could end badly. The darkness could be real darkness, not just decorative. By Season 4, the show had refined this approach enough that it could attempt a zombie apocalypse story with genuine confidence. Not a zombie parody, not a zombie reference, a zombie story, structured with the logic that zombie stories require, executed with the craft that the show's animators and writers were at the height of at that particular moment in the show's history. The third segment of Treehouse of Horror 3 is called Dial Z for Zombies. It runs approximately 8 minutes, and in those 8 minutes, the show stages a zombie apocalypse in Springfield that is constructed with a level of craft and attention that still holds up 3 decades later. The story begins simply. Bart finds a Book of the Dead in a condemned section of the school library. This is the kind of detail the show handles effortlessly, because of course Springfield Elementary has a condemned section, and of course there is a Book of the Dead in it, and of course it is just sitting on a shelf where any 10-year-old can find it. The condemned wing of the library is described briefly, and then shown just long enough to establish it as a place that has been forgotten, dusty and dim, and slightly wrong in the way that forgotten places always are. The book Bart finds there is old in the specific way that dangerous books are old in horror fiction. Worn binding, strange lettering, pages that feel like they were made from something that should not have been used to make pages. Bart wants to use the book to resurrect Snowball the First, the family's original cat who died before the series began. His intentions are genuinely sweet. He wants to bring back a pet his family loved. He has found something powerful, and he wants to use it for something kind, which is exactly the kind of impulse that horror fiction has always understood is the most dangerous one. It is not the malicious wish that undoes things. It is the sincere one. He tries the spell. It does not bring back Snowball. Instead, it raises every corpse in Springfield Cemetery. The zombie outbreak in Dial Z for Zombies is not played entirely for laughs, and this is the key to why it works so well. There are laughs. When Homer grabs a rifle and the family prepares to fight their way through the zombie horde, there is a moment where Homer shoots Flanders through the head and cheerfully declares that he got one. Marge and Lisa are horrified, pointing out that Flanders was not a zombie. Homer considers this briefly, and then shrugs, and the scene moves on. It is a genuinely funny moment, delivered with the specific timing that Dan Castellaneta could achieve in this era, where Homer's moral reasoning was both sincere and completely unreliable. But around the edges of the comedy, Dial Z for Zombies is doing something more interesting. The zombies in this segment are not anonymous. They are the citizens of Springfield. They are people the show has established across 4 seasons. When the dead begin to rise and walk through the streets, they are neighbors. They are teachers. They are acquaintances. The horror of a zombie apocalypse in a show about a small town is that the infected are familiar, and the show uses that familiarity well. To understand why this works as well as it does, it helps to think about what zombie stories are actually about at their structural core. George Romero, who established the modern zombie narrative with Night of the Living Dead in 1968 and developed it further across several sequels, was very clear about what his films were not about. They were not about monsters. The zombies were never the real subject. The real subject was the survivors. How quickly communities dissolve under pressure. How fear transforms reasonable people into something less reasonable. How the familiar becomes threatening, not because it changed, but because the circumstances changed around it. The zombie is the pressure that reveals what was already there. The Simpsons understood this well enough to compress the essential dynamics into 8 minutes. When the zombies rise in Springfield Cemetery and begin moving through the town, the show spends time establishing not just the horror of the situation, but the specific quality of the horror. These are not nameless, shambling figures. They are Springfield residents who have been buried and have now come back, which means they are people with histories, with relationships, with faces that the audience recognizes. When a zombie schoolteacher walks down the corridor of Springfield Elementary, the disturbing quality of the image comes not from the zombie makeup, but from the mismatch, the familiar setting, the familiar figure, the completely wrong state of being. The sequence inside Springfield Elementary is where this comes through most clearly. Bart and Lisa are trying to find the reverse incantation in the school library, while zombies advance through the building. The corridors of the school are filled with the undead, and the camera treats them with the same visual language it normally uses for the school's living population. The proportions are the same. The spaces are the same. The lighting is the same. Everything is exactly as it should be, except that the people filling those spaces are dead and hungry, and moving with the specific wrong quality that the show's animators gave the zombies. Slightly too slow, slightly too deliberate. Their faces faces carrying an expression that is not hunger exactly, but the absence of everything that made them people. The Springfield elementary setting carries additional weight because of what the school means in the show's world. It is the place where children are supposed to be safe, or at least supervised, where the institution of education imposes a kind of order on the chaos of childhood. When that institution is filled with the undead, the inversion is complete. The place of learning becomes the place of danger. The adults who were supposed to protect the children are now the threat. This inversion extends to the broader town. Every institution of Springfield, the places that give the community its structure and its identity, are either overrun or threatened in the segment. The cemetery, the church, the school, the streets. The zombie outbreak is not just a physical crisis, but a structural one. The things that make Springfield Springfield are compromised by the presence of the dead among the living. The show also commits to the consequences of the outbreak in a way that its standard episodes never quite could. The town is overrun. People who were alive and normal at the start of the segment are gone by the end of it. The zombies spread, which is the core mechanic of zombie narratives, and which carries with it a particular anxiety about community and infection and the blurring of the line between the familiar and the monstrous. The show does not soften this or redirect it into pure comedy. It allows the outbreak to be genuinely serious within its runtime. There is a sequence mid-segment that tends to get overlooked in discussions of Dial Z for Zombies, probably because it happens quickly and the episode moves at a pace that does not encourage lingering. Homer and the family are making their way through Springfield toward the school, armed and moving carefully, and they pass through streets that have been transformed by the outbreak. The stores are dark, the houses are quiet, the roads are empty except for the occasional shambling figure. Springfield, which is normally one of the noisier fictional towns in television history, is silent in a way that the show uses very sparingly. The silence is wrong. The audience understands this instinctively because the show has spent 4 seasons filling Springfield with noise. Bart's schemes, Homer's enthusiasm, the constant ambient bustle of a town that never quite settles. When that noise is gone, the absence itself becomes a form of dread. The animation in this stretch is worth examining closely because the Season 4 era represents the peak of the show's original animation quality. The Springfield that the undead have inherited is drawn with a specificity that rewards attention. The details are all right. The town looks exactly like itself. And that exactness is precisely what makes the wrongness of the zombies so effective. Everything is where it should be, and everything is wrong. And those two facts are not in tension. They are the same fact. Bart finds the counterspell. He reads it. The zombies begin to fall. Springfield is saved. And the segment ends with the family sitting on the couch watching television, back to normal, the apocalypse dissolved back into the rhythm of a regular Thursday. The show's decision to end in this way, on the couch, in the living room, with the television on, is the correct ending for a zombie story that has been primarily about the disruption of normalcy. The normalcy is restored. The couch is there. The television is there. The family is together. The joke is that the restoration is complete and instant, that the apocalypse leaves no mark, that within minutes of the town being overrun by the dead, the Simpsons are back in their default position as though nothing occurred. This is funny. It is also, if you hold it for a moment, one of the show's most consistent observations about itself. Nothing sticks. Everything resets. The disaster happens and then the couch absorbs it. There is a specific critique embedded in that ending that the show was making about itself across the Treehouse of Horror format. The Halloween episodes could go to darker places than the regular episodes because the Halloween episodes existed outside continuity. The darkness was permitted precisely because it would not carry forward. The zombie apocalypse could happen because by the next regular episode, Springfield would be fine. Bart could die in various horrible ways across Treehouse of Horror segments because none of those deaths were real deaths. The darkness was contained, quarantined inside these special episodes, allowed to exist there and nowhere else. The couch ending of Dial Z for Zombies is an honest acknowledgement of this dynamic. The family is on the couch because the story is over. The apocalypse ran its course within its allotted runtime, and now it is done. This is what the format guarantees. The darkness has a container. It cannot leak out. The zombie outbreak was real inside the segment and is gone as soon as the segment ends. Dial Z for Zombies was the show's most direct engagement with the zombie genre, which was not yet in the saturated cultural position it would occupy 20 years later. The Walking Dead did not exist. 28 Days Later did not exist. The cultural conversation about zombies that would dominate the early 2000s and 2010s was still years away. When the show staged a zombie apocalypse in 1992, it was working from the original Romero texts and the classic horror tradition, and it was doing so with enough genuine affection for the genre that the segment works as both a parody and as a thing that is actually quietly scary. Part of what gives the segment its lasting quality is the commitment of all its various elements to working in the same direction. The writing, the animation, the voice performances, and the music all understand what kind of story this is and behave accordingly. The score in the zombie sequences is not the show's usual comedic music. It is something lower and slower and more genuinely unsettling. The voice performances, particularly Nancy Cartwright's Bart and Yardley Smith's Lisa, have a quality of real urgency in the school library sequence that the regular episodes rarely require. The comedy and the horror are not fighting each other. They are working in the same direction, which is why the segment can be both funny and frightening within the same few minutes. There is a reason zombie stories work as a genre, and that reason is not really about zombies. It is about community dissolution, about what happens when the familiar becomes threatening, about how quickly civilization can collapse when the people who compose it turn against each other. Zombie narratives are always about survivors and how they treat each other in the aftermath, about whether the thing that makes people human persists when the environment stops rewarding it. The Simpsons could not explore that at length in 8 minutes, but it understood the grammar of the genre well enough to compress the important parts into its runtime. The image that Dial Z for Zombies always leaves behind is a specific one. Bart standing in the school library with the Book of the Dead open before him, reading the words that will undo what he accidentally started, while the sound of approaching zombies fills the corridors outside. He is 10 years old. He started this because he wanted to bring back a cat his family missed. The gap between that intention and the consequence is enormous, and the show plays it completely straight. Bart made a sincere wish with a dangerous tool, and now he has to fix it. And the fixing requires something he was not prepared for when he started, which is the full weight of responsibility for something very large. That weight sits on a 10-year-old's shoulders, and the show does not make that comfortable. It does not give Bart a mentor or a reassuring adult or a clear instruction manual for reversing a zombie apocalypse. He has the book, and he has Lisa, and he has the specific Bart Simpson quality of competence under pressure that surfaces when there is no other option. He finds the counterspell. He reads it. The dead go down. The town is saved. The zombie apocalypse appeared in later Treehouse of Horror episodes as well, each time with a slightly different flavor. In a later Halloween segment, a zombie story built around a fast food product turning the town's population into brain-hungry cannibal zombies gave the show a chance to revisit the genre with more contemporary horror film vocabulary. The show had less squeamishness about graphic imagery in its later seasons, and the zombie content reflected that, but the later zombie segments never quite replicated the specific quality of Dial Z for Zombies, which came from the combination of genuine craft and genuine restraint operating in tandem. But Dial Z for Zombies remains the essential version. Because it was made when the show's visual language was at its most expressive and its most controlled, when the writers and animators understood exactly what every choice was doing. The zombies rise, the town suffers, A child fixes it, the family goes home. Somewhere in that simple structure is a description of how the show thinks about catastrophe. It is Bart who raises the dead, which means it is Bart's recklessness and curiosity that causes the crisis. And it is Bart who reverses the spell, because the show consistently gave its most chaotic character a hidden competence that only emerged when it was truly needed. The crisis was his to start and his to end. Springfield survived because the same child who nearly destroyed it was also the one who cared enough, in the moment when it mattered, to save it. That is not a moral. The show was not making a moral, but it is a pattern, and the show repeated versions of it across its Treehouse of Horror segments throughout its run. The character who causes the catastrophe is also often the one who has to live with the weight of stopping it, which is its own kind of justice, if not the comfortable kind. The undead walked through Springfield in 1992. The town survived. And the show moved on to the next apocalypse, which was waiting just a few years away, carried in the hands of two creatures who had been watching the town from above for longer than anyone realized. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Bart raised the dead and then put them back, and Springfield survived intact. But the zombie story is at least a story about people, even if those people are dead. In the next section, we meet the entities who have been planning Springfield's destruction from beyond the stars, and the show's treatment of alien invasion is funnier, darker, and more consistent than most people realize. Section 4. Kang, Kodos, and the End of the World as a punchline. They appear in a spaceship. They have tentacles. Their eyes are large and yellow, and they speak English with a formality that suggests they have been studying human communication for a very long time and have concluded that it is both simple and baffling. Their names are Kang and Kodos. They are siblings. They are from a planet called Rigel 7, and across more than 30 years of Treehouse of Horror episodes, they have been trying to destroy, or conquer, or consume, or simply observe Springfield with a consistency that no other recurring antagonist in the show's history can match. To understand why Kang and Kodos work as well as they do across such a long period of time, it helps to think about what makes a recurring villain function in a comedy context. The problem with recurring villains in comedy is that repetition erodes menace. If a character keeps threatening something terrible and the terrible thing keeps not happening, the threat becomes a joke about the threat. The audience stops feeling the danger and starts feeling the routine. Most shows solve this by rotating their antagonists, keeping any single threat from becoming too familiar. The Simpsons solved it differently. With Kang and Kodos, the show leaned into the joke, made the repetition itself the subject, and found a way to make two characters who have failed to destroy Earth dozens of times feel, with each new appearance, like they might actually do it this time. The key is that Kang and Kodos are not played as incompetent. They are not bumbling aliens who keep tripping over themselves. They are genuinely menacing beings who keep being stopped not by their own inadequacy, but by the specific chaos of Springfield, which is an environment that defeats malevolent planning as thoroughly as it defeats benevolent planning. The town is not defensible, but it is also, somehow, unconquerable. Not because its residents are heroic, but because they are unpredictable in ways that sophisticated beings from other planets cannot account for. Kang and Kodos first appeared in the very first Treehouse of Horror special, in Season 2, in a segment called Hungry Are the Damned. In that story, the aliens abduct the Simpsons and appear to be preparing to eat them. Lisa suspects this from the beginning. She finds a book in the ship's library that appears to be titled How to Cook Humans. She confronts the aliens. it is revealed that the book is actually titled How to Cook for Humans, and then How to Cook 40 Humans, and then How to Cook for 40 Humans, as the dust keeps getting wiped away. The Simpsons were not in danger. Kang and Kodos were preparing a feast for them as honored guests. And because of Lisa's suspicion, the family was returned to Earth, and the aliens cried in their ship because they had tried to be generous and had been treated as monsters. This first appearance established something important about Kang and Kodos that the show would both honor and subvert for decades afterward. They are not simply malevolent. They are often, in their alien way, sincere. They have motivations and feelings, and a perspective on the Simpsons and on humanity that is not simply predatory. Their relationship with Springfield is complicated. They keep coming back. Whatever they want from this town, they keep wanting it. The writing of Kang and Kodos across the show's run reflects a consistent understanding of what makes them funny and what makes them function as more than just a recurring gag. Their humor comes primarily from the gap between their grandeur and the specific mundane context of Springfield. They are beings from another star system capable of interstellar travel in possession of technology that could reshape planets. And they keep showing up in a small American city to interact with a safety inspector who eats donuts for breakfast and a 10-year-old whose main extracurricular activity is skateboarding. The scale is wrong in a way that the show never stops finding funny and never bothers to explain. Their dialogue is another consistent source of the joke. Kang and Kodos speak in a register that is slightly too formal for every situation they are placed in. They use complete sentences when incomplete sentences would do. They explain things at length that do not require explanation. They are beings of enormous intelligence communicating through a framework of human language that they have mastered technically but not culturally, and the gap between their technical mastery and their cultural awkwardness produces exchanges that are funny precisely because both sides are behaving completely reasonably within their own logic. The Treehouse of Horror specials used Kang and Kodos in a variety of ways across the show's run. Sometimes they are the primary thread of a segment. Sometimes they appear only briefly, as a kind of punctuation at the end of an episode to remind the viewer that the universe is much larger and stranger than Springfield. There is a recurring joke in which the two aliens appear in every Treehouse of Horror, regardless of whether the story has anything to do with them, because the writers made a commitment to their inclusion, and they found ways to honor it no matter what else was happening. In episodes where the story has nothing to do with aliens or space or extraterrestrial threat, Kang and Kodos appear in brief inserts that are almost always funnier for being so thoroughly disconnected from the surrounding content. The segment that most clearly establishes the tone and the potential of the Kang and Kodos stories is from Season 3's Treehouse of Horror 2, in the Monkey's Paw segment. The Simpsons obtain a cursed monkey's paw that grants wishes with terrible consequences. Homer wishes for world peace, and the wish is granted. Every weapon on Earth disappears, and humanity lays down its conflicts. This is the moment when Kang and Kodos choose to invade. They arrive with clubs and primitive weapons, because the only weapons that existed when peace arrived were the weapons they happened to have. They conquer Earth. Humanity is enslaved. And the show plays this as a punchline about the unintended consequences of wishes. But it is also playing it as a genuine description of how peace without defense becomes vulnerability. The joke and the argument are running simultaneously in that segment, which is one of The Simpsons' most reliable structural techniques in its best writing. The surface content is funny. The underlying content is making a real point. And the real point is not undermined by the comedy. Rather, the comedy makes the real point available to an audience that might resist it if it were delivered directly. The Monkey's Paw segment ends with a counter-wish that drives the aliens away and Earth is free again. But the sequence of events, the wish for peace leading directly and causally to alien conquest, is not entirely dissolved by the comedy. It stays in the mind as an argument argument. The most famous Kang and Kodos appearance, the one that most people remember as the clearest example of what the show could do with alien invasion as a concept, is the Presidential Candidates episode from Treehouse of Horror 7 in Season 8. The episode aired in October 1996 during an actual presidential election year, which gave the political content an immediate resonance that it might not have had in a different year. In that segment, Kang and Kodos disguise themselves as Bob Dole and Bill Clinton during the election. They abduct the real candidates and take their places, walking in the rubber suits of the most powerful people in America, delivering speeches and attending debates and shaking hands with voters, while the actual Bob Dole and Bill Clinton float helplessly in tubes on their spaceship. The plan is straightforward in the way that only alien plans can be. Whichever one wins, they control the outcome. The country will be conquered either way. The aliens understood something about two-party political systems that the segment treats as a structural vulnerability. If both candidates are the same entity in different costumes, the election's outcome is irrelevant. The choice the voters believe they are making is not a choice at all. When they are revealed at a press conference, having been unmasked by the Simpsons, the aliens are unimpressed by the public outrage. Kodos points out that the humans are going to vote for one of them anyway, because the alternative is a third-party candidate and nobody ever votes for a third-party candidate. The crowd acknowledges this truth and the election continues, and one of the disguised aliens becomes president, and the episode ends with humanity enslaved and building a giant ray gun under alien supervision. The joke in that segment is about the lack of real choice in electoral politics. But it is also a joke about something more specific than that, about the way democratic systems can be gamed by anyone who understands their formal rules better than the people who live inside them. Kang and Kodos do not need to fool anyone into thinking they are good candidates. They only need to fool enough people into thinking they are the candidates. The bar is lower than it appears, and the aliens identified that gap and walked through it. What makes that segment hold up across decades is that its satirical target has remained relevant without requiring any updating. The specific candidates change, the dynamic they represent does not. Every election cycle since 1996 has produced some version of the Kang and Kodos conversation, some variation on the question of whether the choice being offered is a real choice, some argument about whether voting for the lesser of two aliens is still voting for an alien. The show made that argument in 8 minutes in 1996, and it has been true for every election since. There is a detail in the presidential segment that tends to get overlooked because the broader joke is so immediately funny. The rubber suit technology that Kang and Kodos use to disguise themselves is not perfect. If you look carefully, the suits are slightly wrong. The proportions are almost right, but not quite. The movements are almost human, but not quite. Any individual observer paying close enough attention would be able to identify something off about both candidates. And yet no one does, until The Simpsons expose them. The segment is not saying that the voters are stupid. It is saying that voters are looking at the broad outlines of what they expect to see, and when the broad outlines are present, the details go unexamined. That is not a flattering description of democratic participation, but it is an honest one. The physical comedy of Kang and Kodos in rubber suits delivering political speeches is one of the most purely funny images the show ever produced. The aliens are enormous. Their suits are straining. Their movements have the quality of something practiced rather than natural. And they are standing at podiums delivering completely recognizable political rhetoric with the timing and the cadence and the specific kind of confident vagueness that political speech requires, while being, under the rubber, beings from another star system who have tentacles and who view humanity primarily as a resource to be managed. The The segment ends with the aliens having won, with the enslaved human population building something for their new masters in a landscape that looks nothing like the America that existed at the start of the story. It is a bad ending. The heroes lost. Springfield, and by extension the country, is conquered. And the Simpsons, who revealed the truth, are part of the enslaved workforce, no better off for having been the ones who told everyone what was happening. This is one of the recurring features of the Kang and Kodos episodes that distinguishes them from the other Treehouse of Horror content. The bad endings that are actually bad. In most horror segments, the show finds a way to restore order by the end. The zombie spell is reversed. The rapture is postponed. The nuclear bomb survivors are dealt with. But in several of the Kang and Kodos stories, the aliens win. The Earth is conquered or enslaved or harvested, and the episode ends with that outcome intact. The show does not always rescue its characters from the alien threat. Sometimes it just lets the invasion succeed and then moves on to the next story. This willingness to let the aliens win is connected to something the show understood about the Treehouse of Horror format. That horror is most effective when consequences are real. A horror story in which the outcome is always the same, in which safety is always restored, becomes a story about safety rather than danger. By allowing Kang and Kodos to occasionally succeed, the show kept the threat credible across 3 decades of episodes. Viewers could not be certain each time the aliens appeared that the story would resolve in Springfield's favor. The uncertainty is small but real, and it is what gives the Kang and Kodos segments their particular texture. Beyond the purely comedic and satirical content, the Kang and Kodos appearances accumulate into something that functions almost like a mythology within the show's Halloween episodes. Across 30-plus years of Treehouse of Horror specials, a portrait of these two beings emerges that is more complex than the individual episodes suggest. They are siblings, which means they have a relationship with each other that is not just tactical. There are episodes in which their dynamic reads as genuinely familial, with the specific mix of loyalty and exasperation and competitive one-upmanship that siblings everywhere recognize. They argue, they defer to each other, they occasionally undermine each other in the way that people who love each other and have known each other for a very long time sometimes do. Their specific interest in Earth is never fully explained, which is the right choice. The mystery of why these particular beings from Rigel 7 keep coming back to this particular town on this particular planet is more interesting than any explanation the show could offer. They have been here since the beginning. They have seen Springfield survive bombs and raptured and zombie outbreaks and political chaos. They have watched The Simpsons specifically across dozens of encounters. Something about this family, this town, this chaotic and improbable place keeps drawing them back. There is a theory among the show's fans that Kang and Kodos are not really aliens trying to conquer Earth, but are instead representatives of death itself, appearing at the edge of each Treehouse of Horror segment to signal that what just happened was genuinely fatal for someone or something. The evidence for this is mostly atmospheric rather than textual, but the atmospheric evidence is real. They always appear at the edge of catastrophe. They are always watching. They are always there when the worst things happen. They never die and never age and never change. In a show where the characters are already famously frozen in time, whatever the Simpsons go through, Kang and Kodos observe it from above, unmoved and unchanged. Their visual design supports this reading in an interesting way. They are not designed to be frightening in the way that horror movie monsters are frightening, sudden, aggressive, physically overwhelming. They are frightening in a different register, the register of the patient and inevitable. Their large eyes do not express urgency. Their tentacles move slowly. Their ships hover rather than attack. They are beings who are not in a hurry, which in a show that is always in a hurry, always moving to the next joke, always resetting to the next episode, stands out as something genuinely strange. Whether or not that reading holds up under scrutiny, it points at something true about how the show used these characters. Kang and Kodos function as witnesses. They are the constant presence at the edge of Springfield's disasters, recording what happens without being touched by it. The town burns and floods and gets bombed and invaded. Kang and Kodos watch from their ship. The town survives. Kang and Kodos keep watching. They will be there at the end, whenever the end comes, in whatever form it takes. They have been there for every treehouse of horror since the very beginning. What the aliens represent, in the broadest sense, is the universe looking at Springfield from outside. The show is always primarily about Springfield from the inside, about the experience of living in this particular town, being part of this particular family, navigating the specific landscape of a place that is at once completely ordinary and completely strange. Kang and Kodos provide the counterpoint, the view from somewhere else entirely, from beings who did not grow up here and do not have sentimental attachments, and see Springfield not as home, but as a phenomenon to be categorized and, ideally, used. The comedy of their repeated failures to conquer the town comes partly from the contrast between that cold, external perspective and the reality of what Springfield actually is, which is too chaotic, too specific, too densely populated with eccentric individuals to be managed by any system an alien intelligence could design. You cannot conquer a town that does not behave consistently. You cannot enslave a population whose defining characteristic is that they do whatever Homer Simpson does, which is to say, whatever seems like a good idea in the immediate moment, regardless of strategic implication. Springfield defeats alien invasion the same way it defeats every other threat, not through heroism or planning or collective action, but through the specific, ungovernable quality of being itself. The aliens keep coming back because they keep thinking that this time they will have accounted for it. They never do. That is either the most comforting thing about the Kang and Kodos stories or the funniest, depending on the episode. And the show, which has always been comfortable holding both readings simultaneously, lets both be true at once. They will be there at the end, whenever the end comes, in whatever form it takes. They have been there for every treehouse of horror since the very beginning. That is a kind of fidelity that very few characters in television history have maintained. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Kang and Kodos have watched every disaster Springfield has survived, and they will keep watching. But not every vision of Springfield's future is delivered by aliens with tentacles. Some of the most affecting images of what the town becomes are delivered quietly, in non-Halloween episodes, in flash forwards that the show planted like seeds across its decades of storytelling. That is where we go next. Section 5. The Quiet Apocalypse of Springfield's Future. The end of the world does not always arrive with a nuclear bomb. Sometimes it arrives slowly, in the shape of a flash-forward episode where the characters you have known for years are older, or gone, or diminished, or living lives so different from what you expected for them that the distance between who they were and who they became feels like its own kind of catastrophe. The Simpsons used flash-forward storytelling more than almost any other animated show of its era, and the futures it described for Springfield were not always dark. But when they were dark in a way that sat quietly inside the viewer rather than announcing itself. The show never called attention to the darkness in its future episodes. It placed the darkness carefully and then moved the story along, trusting that the viewer who noticed it would carry it forward. What makes the flash-forward format so specifically suited to The Simpsons is the show's foundational premise: a family that never ages, living in a town that never changes, cycling through the same relationships and conflicts and recoveries across decades of broadcast time. That premise is the source of the show's comfort. You can return to Springfield at any point and find it exactly as you left it. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Homer is at the plant, Marge is in the kitchen. The house looks the same, the town looks the same, nothing has moved. The flash-forward episodes break that promise deliberately. They take the characters out of the eternal present of the show's normal storytelling and place them in a time where things have moved, where the children are adults and the adults are old, and some of the people who were there at the beginning are gone. The contrast between the eternal Springfield of the regular episodes and the changed Springfield of the flash-forwards is where the emotional weight of those episodes lives. It is not that the future is necessarily worse than the present, it is that the future is different, and different, for a show built on the comfort of sameness, is its own kind of loss. The first true flash-forward episode is Lisa's Wedding from Season 6, which aired in March of 1995. It is set in 2010, which at the time of airing was 15 years in the future. The episode follows Lisa as she falls in love with a young British man named Hugh at a British university, and the story is framed as a vision shown to Lisa by a fortune teller at a Renaissance fair. The future Springfield of 2010 is comically extrapolated from the mid-90s, with video phones and pneumatic tube transportation and a city that has changed enough to signal the passage of time without having changed so much that it feels unrecognizable. The comedy of the futurism in Lisa's Wedding is warm rather than satirical. The show is not mocking its own inability to predict the future. It is doing what the show does best with comedy, using it as a vehicle for something more sincere. The pneumatic tubes and the video phones are not really about technology. They are about the specific quality of imagining a future that is 15 years away when you are young. The way the future feels both close enough to plan for and far enough away to be genuinely unknown. The future Springfield of 2010 is the future as Lisa might imagine it, which means it is the future as someone who loves Springfield and is already half planning to leave it might imagine it, familiar in its bones, different on its surface. But underneath the comedy and the romantic story is something that Lisa's Wedding handles with genuine sadness. The future in that episode is one in which the Simpsons are older and grayer, and smaller in some way that the episode does not fully name. Homer is balder and slower. Marge has more lines in her face. The house looks the same but feels different in the way that childhood homes always feel different when you return to them as an adult. Not because the house changed, but because you did, and the house stays the same regardless. The gap between what the house is and what it used to mean is the same as the gap between who your parents are and who they were when you were small enough to believe they were infinite. When Hugh, the man Lisa loves, reveals that he expects her to cut ties with her family after the wedding, he speaks of The Simpsons with a contempt that the episode plays as his fatal flaw, but that also, quietly, reflects something real. Her family is a lot. They always have been. Homer, at a formal dinner with Hugh's parents, behaves exactly as Homer always behaves, and the damage is real, even though the comedy is broad. The episode is honest about this. The Simpsons are not easy to love from the outside. They are a family that requires a specific kind of commitment, a willingness to accept them completely and without the expectation of improvement. And Hugh does not have that willingness. His inability to accept them is also an inability to fully accept Lisa, because Lisa is who she is, partly because of who they are. When Lisa turns down Hugh and decides to stay connected to her family, she is choosing something real over something polished. The episode honors that choice without sentimentality, which means it also does not pretend the choice is without cost. Lisa gives up a future that was, by many measures, better than the one Springfield can offer her. She does it because the people she loves are here, and because who she is without them is someone she does not quite recognize. That is the honest version of the choice, and Lisa's Wedding tells it honestly. The older Homer in that episode is worth paying particular attention to, because the show does something with him that it rarely does. It shows him being kind in a sustained and quiet way that does not involve any of the chaos or enthusiasm that usually accompany his good intentions. When Homer speaks to Lisa about Hugh and about her future, there is a steadiness to him that the present-day Homer almost never manages. He is slower, yes, and older, and the show lets all of that be visible. But he is also, in this future, someone who has arrived at a kind of peace with who he is and what he has, and what he means to the people around him. The older Homer in Lisa's wedding is the version of Homer that the viewer always knew was in there somewhere, underneath the schemes and the blunders and the spectacular failures of judgment. He loves his daughter completely. He always did. In the future, he has found a way to show it that does not accidentally break anything. The second major flash-forward episode is Bart to the Future from season 11, which aired in March of 2000, and which has become the most discussed flash-forward episode in the show's history for reasons that have nothing to do with its quality. In that episode, Bart is shown a vision of the future by a Native American casino manager, a sequence that is one of the more awkward cultural missteps in the show's run. The vision shows a future in which Lisa is the President of the United States, and Bart is a struggling musician living with Ralph Wiggum. The notorious element of Bart to the Future is a single line of dialogue. When Lisa meets with her senior staff to discuss the country's financial situation, she mentions that they have inherited a budget crunch from the previous administration. The previous president, she says, was President Trump. The episode aired in 2000. Donald Trump would not be elected to the presidency for 16 years. When that election happened, the moment became one of the most discussed examples of supposed Simpsons prophecy in the show's history. The writer of the episode, Dan Greaney, explained in interviews after Trump's election that the line was meant as a joke about the kind of person who might actually run for president and win, about the specific American tendency to elevate celebrity above governance. It was not prophecy. It was satire about a direction the country was already moving in, a direction that felt like comedy in 2000 and less like comedy by 2016. The show had not predicted the future. It had described, with reasonable accuracy, a present tendency and then extrapolated it forward. That is what good satire does. It does not see what is coming. It sees what is already here and follows it to its logical conclusion. But the flash forward in Bart to the Future is doing something sadder than its famous line suggests. Bart, in the future the episode describes, has not realized any potential. He is a middle-aged man who is not grown, who is still living on the kindness of others, who has the same reckless charm and the same emptiness that 10-year-old Bart had, now stretched across the body of an adult. He shares an apartment with Ralph Wiggum. He plays in a band that will never go anywhere. He borrows money from his parents when he needs it and pays it back when he remembers to, and sometimes forgets to remember. He is not evil. He is not broken. He is just someone who ran out of time without noticing, who looked up one day and found that the future had arrived and he had not prepared for it. The show does not mourn this explicitly. It plays Bart's adult situation as comedy, as it plays almost everything. But the comedy only works because the sadness underneath it is real enough to feel. Adult Bart is funny because the gap between who he was supposed to be and who he turned out to be is wide enough to laugh at, and wide gaps are only funny when they are first, somehow, sad. The contrast between adult Bart and adult Lisa in that episode is doing the work that the show has always done with those two characters, using the contrast between them to say something about the different ways a childhood can go. Lisa applied herself. She took her intelligence and her idealism and her frustration with the world, and she built something with them. She became the thing she always seemed to be becoming. Bart took his intelligence, which was always real, and his charisma, which was always genuine, and he spent them on things that did not compound. He remained himself, which sounds like a virtue, but is not always one. Remaining exactly yourself across the span of decades, without growth or change, or the accumulation of wisdom that time is supposed to produce, is a kind of stasis that the flash forward treats as both inevitable and slightly tragic. The episode suggests that these outcomes were always likely, not fated, not unavoidable, but consistent with who both children were. Lisa always studied. Bart always skated. Lisa always asked why. Bart always asked why not, which is a different question with a different answer. The futures they arrive at in Bart to the Future are recognizable extensions of who they were at 10 and 8, which is either the most natural thing in the world or the saddest, depending on whether you think people can change themselves or only become more thoroughly themselves over time. Between Lisa's wedding and Bart to the Future, the show developed a whole approach to flash-forward storytelling that other episodes built on across subsequent seasons. Future episodes appeared in various forms across the show's run, some as dedicated flash-forward stories, and others as brief glimpses embedded within present-day narratives. A Season 4 episode showed Bart becoming Chief Justice of the United States in 2032, in a brief vision that the show never returned to, but that planted the idea early that Bart's future was genuinely unknowable and might contain anything. A Season 6 episode called Lisa's Rival showed an alternate version of Lisa's future that differed in detail from the one Lisa's wedding described. The show was not consistent across these visions because it was not trying to be. Each flash forward was its own argument about who these characters were, not a chapter in a continuous narrative about who they would become. The flash-forward tradition continued and deepened across the show's later seasons, with several episodes in the 20s and 30s offering glimpses of Springfield at various points in the future that were more melancholy in tone than the earlier versions. The show's relationship with its own characters had changed by then. The early flash-forwards were optimistic in their structure, even when they were honest about failure. Lisa makes the right choice. Bart gets a vision that might motivate him. The future is something to imagine, rather than something to dread. The later flash-forwards had a different quality. They were honest in a quieter and less hopeful way about what time does to people and to places. The Season 19 episode, That 90s Show, offered a different kind of temporal displacement. Not a flash-forward, but a flashback to the 1990s that contradicted several established details of the show's own history. In that episode, Homer and Marge's early relationship is depicted in ways that conflict with what previous episodes had established about their past. The show used it as a comedy episode, and it received mixed responses from fans who noticed the contradictions. But within the broader project of the show's relationship with time, the episode is interesting because it demonstrated that the show's past was as flexible as the show's future. Nothing was fixed. The timeline could be revised in either direction. The Springfield that existed was the Springfield the current story required. This flexibility with time, which drove some viewers to frustration and others to elaborate theoretical explanations, is actually one of the show's most consistent features. A show that never ages its characters in the present cannot have a fixed past either, because a fixed past would imply a fixed present that the format refuses to permit. The Simpsons exist in a kind of temporal bubble, where time passes in the stories without passing for the characters, where the world around them changes without them changing, where the future can be glimpsed in flash-forwards that are real within their episodes and then gone when the episode ends. It is an unusual relationship with time for a dramatic narrative to have, but it is honest to what the show is, which is not a story with a beginning and an end, but an ongoing portrait of a family in a permanent present. The Season 36 finale, A Stranger Things, contained the most recent and the most affecting flash-forward the show has produced in years. In it, a grown Bart and Lisa have drifted apart in the aftermath of Marge's death, which the episode confirms happened while Marge was in her early 70s. Lisa has moved away from Springfield. She has become the president of what used to be the NBA, now rebranded as the WNBA, while the men's league has been renamed the MNBA. She sends money home for Homer's care, but does not visit. Bart has converted the family home into a casual retirement community for Homer, Lenny, Carl, and others, surviving on the funds Lisa sends and on his usual resourcefulness. The specific future that A Stranger Things describes for Bart is worth examining carefully because it is the most sympathetic and the most quietly devastating version of adult Bart that the show has produced. He is not a failure in the way that Bart to the Future's adult Bart was a failure. He has found something to do with himself that is, in its own unambitious way, genuinely good. He is taking care of old men who have nowhere better to go. He has turned the family home into a place where people like his father can be comfortable in their final years, surrounded by familiar things, in the company of someone who actually knows and loves them. This is not the career that anyone imagined for Bart Simpson, but it is not nothing. It is, in fact, something that takes the specific qualities Bart has always had, his loyalty to the people he loves, his comfort with chaos, his ability to be present with people without requiring them to be anything other than what they are, and puts them to use in a context where they matter. Marge died off-screen, without ceremony, in a montage set to a Sarah McLachlan performance. The show killed Marge Simpson in a flash forward, and then moved on. That is a sentence that requires a moment to sit with. Marge Simpson, the emotional center of the show, the woman who has held the family together across 36 years of broadcasting, dead in a future the show described with the same light touch it uses for everything else. The decision to place her death in a montage, accompanied by a song that has become culturally associated with grief and loss, rather than giving it its own scene or its own episode, is a choice that could read as casual, but actually reads as honest. Marge's death in this future is not a dramatic event in the way that television usually stages death. It is the thing that happened, and the show moves through it the way life moves through loss, without stopping, without giving it the space it probably deserved, because the people who are left have to keep going, and keeping going does not wait for grief to finish. Tucked into the background of the cemetery scene where her grave is shown, there is a second grave. The inscription and the image carved into the stone suggests that Moe Szyslak also died in that future, and the image on the stone suggests he died by his own hand, a head in an oven. It is a background detail in a scene that is already doing a lot, and most viewers would miss it on first watch. But for anyone who has followed Moe's character across the show's run, across the many episodes where his depression and his loneliness and his specific brand of quiet despair have been visible, the detail lands with a weight that is disproportionate to its size on screen. The futures that The Simpsons described across its decades were not always dark, but the darkness that was there was real darkness, the specific low-light kind that comes not from bombs or aliens or zombies, but from time passing and people changing, and the quiet, irreversible fact that the world the characters were made for does not last forever. Marge in a grave, Moe in a grave with his own image as its epitaph, Bart in the family home, older and slower, doing the best he can with what he has, Lisa somewhere else, accomplished and alone in the specific way that accomplished and alone looks when the accomplishment is real, but the solitude is also real, and neither cancels the other out. These are not apocalypse images in the way that a nuclear bomb is an apocalypse image. They are the apocalypse that is already happening, 1 year at a time, in every household, everywhere. the quiet kind, the kind that does not announce itself. The kind that you only recognize in retrospect, when you look back and notice how much has changed without any single moment you could point to as the moment things changed. Springfield has survived every bomb and every rapture and every alien invasion. The future the show eventually described was the one it could not save anyone from. The one where time simply runs out. For Marge, for Mo, for the Springfield that existed when the show began, yellow-skinned and improbable, and alive in a way that no flash-forward, however carefully constructed, can quite recapture. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every apocalypse Springfield faced came from outside. Bombs, aliens, raptures, the slow erosion of time. But the darkest theory the show has ever generated suggests the threat was always internal, always quiet, always Homer, lying unconscious somewhere, while the world his mind built grew stranger around him. Section 6. The theory that Homer never woke up. Every long-running show accumulates theories. Fans look for patterns, for explanations, for ways to make the contradictions and inconsistencies of a decades-long story cohere into something that makes sense. The Simpsons, with its enormous episode count and its deliberate rejection of consistent canon, has generated more theories than almost any other show in television history. But of all the theories the show's fans have produced, one has endured longer, circulated more widely, and found more evidence within the text of the show than any other. Homer Simpson is in a coma. He has been in a coma since the 1990s. Everything that has happened since then, every adventure and every celebrity guest and every trip to space and every time travel episode and every moment that pushed the show beyond the boundaries of ordinary suburban life, all of it has been a dream being generated inside the mind of an unconscious man who cannot wake up. The theory has two proposed origin points for the coma itself. The first is Season 2, Episode 11, One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, in which Homer eats fugu at a Japanese restaurant and is told that the chef may have prepared it incorrectly. Fugu is a pufferfish whose organs contain a potentially lethal toxin, and if the preparation goes wrong, the person who ate it can die within 24 hours. Homer is informed of this. He spends what he believes to be his last day on Earth trying to experience the things he has always meant to do. Make peace with his father, tell his children he loves them, listen to Lisa play saxophone. He goes to sleep that night expecting not to wake up. The next morning, he wakes up perfectly healthy, and the episode continues. The second proposed origin is Season 4, Episode 18, So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. In that episode, Bart pranks Homer in an unusually aggressive way. He shakes up a beer can and leaves it for Homer to open. And when Homer does, the explosion is large enough to crush him under a vending machine. Homer is hospitalized. He falls into a coma. The rest of the episode takes place with Homer unconscious, visited by his family, while the doctors try to determine what will bring him out of it. Eventually, Bart connects his Game Boy to Homer's life support equipment, and Homer wakes up. The theory proposes that he did not actually wake up. Not from the clip show coma, and perhaps not from the fugu scare either. The show that viewers have been watching since that point, the increasingly surreal and inconsistent show that replaced the grounded and emotionally precise early seasons, is Homer's unconscious mind generating a version of his life that feels real, but is actually a dream. The evidence cited for this theory includes the show's tonal shift, the way the stories became more fantastical and impossible as the seasons progressed, the inconsistency in character details and timelines that a dreaming mind would not be required to reconcile, and the fundamental unchanging quality of Springfield itself, where nothing is ever permanently different and no one ever ages. The theory draws additional weight from a specific quality of coma dream logic that anyone who has spent time thinking about unconscious states will recognize. In a coma dream, dream, the dreaming mind does not generate new information. It recombines what it already has. It takes the faces and the places and the feelings that were familiar before the injury and assembles them into scenarios that feel continuous and real, but that are built entirely from existing material. The Homer of the early seasons had specific memories and specific relationships and a specific understanding of the world. The coma dream theory proposes that everything after the vending machine is the dreaming mind working with that existing material, recombining it into increasingly elaborate and increasingly disconnected scenarios because the mind, cut off from new real experience, has only its old material to work with and eventually starts straining it past its natural limits. This explains, within the theory's own logic, why the later seasons feel different in quality from the earlier ones. The early material is close to the source, close to Homer's real memories and real feelings and real understanding of his life. As the coma extends, the material is stretched further and further from its origins. The characters become more extreme because extreme is what the dreaming mind reaches for when the original material starts to thin. Homer becomes more cartoonish because cartoon is what happens to memory when it is used too many times and the original resolution starts to degrade. Springfield becomes inconsistent because the dreaming mind cannot maintain the details of a real place indefinitely. Things start to drift. The theory was circulated widely enough that the show eventually acknowledged it directly. In season 34, in the anthology episode Lisa the Boy Scout, one of the segments features Homer awakening from a coma that he has been in since season 2's Bart the Daredevil. In that segment, Homer wakes up and discovers that the entire intervening period of the show was a coma dream. The show acknowledges the theory and then dismisses it through the framing of a deliberately terrible idea, a segment designed to represent the writers mocking their own weakest creative instincts. This is The Simpsons' characteristic approach to fan theories: acknowledge them, compress them into a joke, and move on. By doing this, the show gets credit for awareness without having to commit to any specific interpretation. The Homer coma theory is simultaneously acknowledged and denied, which means it remains available as a reading even as it is officially rejected. The show cannot fully dismiss it because dismissing it requires staging it, and staging it makes it real within the episode even as the framing insists it is absurd. The theory survives its own debunking. The question of why the theory persists is worth spending time on. The coma reading is not the only explanation for the show's tonal shift or its internal inconsistencies. The simpler explanation is that a writing staff of hundreds of people across 35 years, working on a show that deliberately rejected canon and treated its own history as flexible, produced a body of work that does not cohere into a single consistent reality. This is not a mystery. This is just what happens to shows that run long enough. But the coma theory persists because it does something more interesting than simply explaining the inconsistencies. It reframes the entire show as a portrait of a suffering mind. If everything after season 2 is Homer's dream, then the show is not a comedy about a bumbling father and his family. It is a tragedy about a man trapped in unconsciousness, generating a world that contains everything he loves in an increasingly distorted form. Never quite stable, never quite real. The characters around him slowly becoming more extreme and less recognizable as his mind struggles to maintain them. That reading makes seasons 1 and 2 the ground truth, the real Springfield, the actual family that the real Homer knew. And everything after that is the failing signal of a brain trying to hold on to what it knows. The early seasons of the show were, by wide consensus, more emotionally precise. Homer and Marge's relationship had specific tension and warmth. The children had consistent internal lives. The stories were grounded in recognizable human human situations: money trouble, family conflict, professional failure, social embarrassment. The humor was still absurd, but it was absurd in the way that real life sometimes is absurd, in the way that a specific, recognizable situation can spiral into something that feels impossible from the inside. After season 3 or 4, the consensus holds that the show began to drift. Homer became more cartoonish and less consistent. The stories became more elaborate and less emotionally coherent. Celebrities appeared with increasing frequency. The show's relationship with its own rules loosened until the rules were more like suggestions. If this drift is the result of a long-running show finding its way through creative changes and staff turnover, and the simple pressure of maintaining quality across hundreds of episodes, it is unremarkable. If it is the result of a man's unconscious mind gradually losing its grip on the reality it is trying to reconstruct, it is one of the saddest things ever described in a cartoon. There is a specific emotional texture to the coma dream reading that does not apply to the production explanation. If the drift is a production artifact, it is a disappointment, a loss of quality that happened because maintaining quality is hard. If the drift is a coma artifact, it is a grief, the visible evidence of a mind deteriorating in real time, the dream becoming less coherent as the dreamer becomes less able to maintain it. The same episodes, read through that lens, become something different. Every inconsistency is a symptom. Every moment of surrealism is evidence. Every time the show does something that could not happen in the real world is a small indicator that the world it is depicting is not the real world. The show itself returned to this ambiguity one more time in a season 30 episode that featured Bart jumping off a cliff on a dare, ending up hospitalized, and lying to his mother about having visited heaven during his unconsciousness. The episode is called Bart's Not Dead, which is the show directly addressing one of its other persistent fan theories while also doing something more interesting. By centering the episode on the question of what Bart experienced while unconscious, and by making the answer deliberately unclear within the narrative, the show left open the question of what consciousness and unconsciousness mean in this particular fictional universe. Homer might be dreaming, or the show might simply be what it appears to be, a long, inconsistent, sometimes magnificent, and sometimes disappointing record of a fictional family's life across 3.5 decades. Both readings are available. The show has made sure of that. It acknowledged the theory and then put it back on the shelf, where it sits alongside everything else the show has generated, waiting to be taken down and turned over again. But here is the thought that the theory leaves behind, the one that sticks. If Homer is dreaming, what is he dreaming about? He is dreaming about his family. He is dreaming about his town. He is dreaming about donuts and bowling and a blue-haired woman who chose him and 3 children who are always in some form there. Whatever the coma dream contains, whatever distortions and inconsistencies accumulate over decades of unconscious storytelling, the center of it does not change. Homer's dream is a dream about his family. That is either a comfort or a heartbreak, depending on the hour. And the show, which has always been comfortable being both things at once, does not choose between them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The coma theory asks whether Homer is experiencing a dream. The next theory asks something even larger, whether every character in Springfield is experiencing a kind of afterlife, whether the town itself is something other than what it appears to be, whether Springfield is not a place where people live, but a place where they wait. Section 7. Springfield is purgatory. There is a word that comes up when people discuss the theories surrounding The Simpsons and the strange quality of life in Springfield. The word that keeps appearing in Reddit threads and fan forums and long late-night conversations about what the show might really be about. That word is purgatory, not used loosely or casually, but used in its specific theological sense. A state of existence after death in which souls undergo a process of purification before moving on to whatever comes next. not heaven, not hell, something in between, something indefinite, something that by its nature cannot last, but also cannot be hurried. The Springfield purgatory theory holds that the characters of The Simpsons are not living people going about their daily lives. They are souls in a kind of waiting state, trapped in a version of the world they knew in life, unable to age or change or die permanently, cycling through the same patterns and the same conflicts and the same occasional moments of grace, in a process that might eventually lead somewhere, but has not yet. The evidence people point to is structural rather than textual. The show's most cited unusual quality is the absence of change over time. Characters do not age. Seasons do not advance. Bart has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa has been 8. Maggie the baby has been a baby for longer than most babies have been alive. The town looks the same. The economy of the town does not change. The relationships between characters do not fundamentally evolve. Homer and Marge cycle through conflict and reconciliation. Bart cycles through mischief and consequence. Lisa cycles through idealism and disillusionment. And then they reset and the cycle begins again. In a realistic show, this would simply be a function of the format. Animated sitcoms do not age their characters because aging characters creates practical problems. You have to change their relationships, their stories, their voices, eventually their whole situation. The Simpsons remained static because remaining static is easier to sustain than change. This is the simple production explanation. But the purgatory theory takes that static quality and reframes it as the defining characteristic of a specific state of existence. Souls in purgatory do not age. They do not die. They cycle through their patterns, experiencing their conflicts and their moments of connection and their small failures and their occasional redemptions in a process whose endpoint they cannot see and whose purpose they cannot fully understand. That description fits Springfield very precisely. The yellow skin of the Springfield residents is one of the visual details that the purgatory theory attaches meaning to. In life, human skin is various colors, but none of them are yellow. Yellow, in religious iconography from multiple traditions, is associated with gold, with light, with the divine. The residents of Springfield are marked in a way that separates them from realistic human depiction. They exist in a slightly different register. The purgatory theory suggests that the yellow is not an animation convention, but a marker of their state, beings between worlds, neither fully of the living nor of the dead. The theory also points to the physical impossibility of the town itself. Springfield has geography that shifts between episodes. Its position within the United States has never been confirmed, and changes depending on the episode. It borders multiple other states simultaneously. It contains a coastline and a desert, and a mountain, and a downtown, and a suburb, and a nuclear plant, and all of the other features that different stories have required, without any of these features maintaining a consistent relationship to each other. The town cannot be mapped because it does not exist in the way that real places exist. It exists as the setting requires it to exist. In a production context, this is simply the writers and animators making things up as they go, across decades of storytelling. But in the purgatory reading, the shifting geography of Springfield is the geography of a spiritual state, a place that changes to accommodate the soul's needs rather than maintaining a fixed physical reality, because the physical is not really what is happening here. The character's inability to permanently die supports this reading in an interesting way. Across the Treehouse of Horror episodes and in various regular continuity stories, the Springfield characters have died and returned without any lasting consequence. Hans Moleman, the nearsighted elderly man who serves as the show's most frequent victim of catastrophic injury, has died on screen more times than can be counted. He is always back. Sideshow Bob has been imprisoned and escaped and returned more times than any real penal system could accommodate. Characters introduced in one episode die and return in later ones. Death in Springfield is not permanent because permanence is not a feature of the state the characters exist in. The redemptive aspect of the purgatory theory is worth noting because it is not all darkness. If the characters of Springfield are souls undergoing purification, then the things they experience, the conflicts they cycle through, the moments of connection and generosity and growth that appear across the show's run are not pointless. They are the process. The small kindnesses that Homer manages against his own worse instincts. The moments when Bart chooses the harder, more generous thing. The times when Marge holds the family together against pressure that should break it. These would not be simply episodes. They would be the work that souls in purification are supposed to do. Springfield, in this reading, is not a prison. It is a school, a very long, very chaotic, occasionally very funny school, where the lessons are not taught directly but lived, where the same situations recur until the characters learn something from them, or until the universe decides to try a different approach. The Ned Flanders who starts the show is already near the top of the class, which might be why he keeps suffering the most. The more there is to lose, the more that can be asked of you. What the purgatory theory cannot fully account for is the suffering that is simply absurd. The Hans Moleman deaths and the Sideshow Bob rake gag, and the 1,000 small cruelties that the show uses as comedy without redemptive intent. Purgatory in its classic theological sense is purposive. Every experience is directed toward a good end. The Simpsons is not always purposive in that way. Some things happen because they are funny. Some characters suffer because suffering is the joke. But the theory does not need to be watertight to be interesting. What it does is offer a reading of the show in which the strangeness of Springfield is not a production limitation, but a quality of the place itself. A town where nothing is permanent, where no one really dies, where the same families have lived out the same conflicts for 35 years without any of it coming to a conclusion, is a strange kind of town to inhabit. The purgatory theory gives that strangeness a name, and there is something in the name that fits. Springfield has always felt like a place between places, not the past and not the future, not fully real and not fully absurd. Somewhere in between, caught in a state that has its own consistency and its own rules, but that does not quite connect to the world outside the television screen. That feeling is part of why the show has lasted as long as it has. You can return to Springfield and find it exactly as you left it, which is either the promise of a familiar comfort or the description of a soul that has not yet moved on. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Purgatory is the waiting place, but there is a theory about Springfield that is not about waiting, but about slow, ongoing damage, about the thing that has been poisoning the town for decades and changing its people in ways that the show has been documenting without naming. That is the radiation theory, and it is the most grounded and most evidenced of all the dark theories the show has generated. Section 8. The radiation that changed everything. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been in operation since before the show began. In the show's timeline, it was running when Homer was young, when Bart was born, when Lisa was born, when Maggie was born. It has been running through the entire history of Springfield as the show depicts it, pumping energy through the town's wires and, if the radiation theory is correct, pumping something else through everything else. The theory begins with the obvious. The residents of Springfield have yellow skin and bulging eyes. These are not features of human beings in normal conditions. In the animation convention of the show, yellow skin is simply the house style, the choice that Matt Groening and his collaborators made early in the show's development to make the characters visually distinct. But the radiation theory proposes that within the show's own logic, there is an in-universe explanation for why everyone in Springfield looks the way they look. They have all been exposed, over decades, to radiation leaking from the nuclear plant, and the physical changes visible in their appearance are the result of that exposure. The plant's safety record within the show's own storytelling supports this reading with remarkable consistency. Homer, as the safety inspector for Sector 7G, has presided over a facility that dumps radioactive waste into rivers, stuffs it into trees, and leaves it on playgrounds. Mr. Burns, who owns the plant, has been consistently indifferent to the safety violations because fixing them would cost money, and costing money is the one thing Burns cannot tolerate. The plant has experienced near meltdowns, handled incompetently and averted by luck rather than competence. Blinky, the three-eyed fish that appears in the river near the plant, is one of the show's most iconic visual gags, and one of its most persistent pieces of environmental storytelling. The fish has 3 eyes, because the water it lives in has been contaminated. The radiation theory extends beyond skin color. It proposes that the behavioral changes visible across the show's run are also a consequence of prolonged exposure. In the show's early seasons, the characters were more internally consistent. Homer, while always somewhat dim, had moments of genuine competence and emotional precision. Ned Flanders was a kind and generous neighbor whose faith expressed itself as warmth rather than judgment. Ralph Wiggum was a slightly unusual child who showed occasional sparks of ordinary cognitive function. The early Ralph could hold a conversation. By later seasons, something had shifted. Homer became dramatically less capable and dramatically more cartoonish. Ned became defined almost exclusively by his religiosity. Ralph became entirely disconnected from ordinary reality. A character who exists now as a delivery system for non sequiturs. The theory proposes that these shifts, which the show's critics have attributed to poor writing or diminishing creativity, are actually the visible effects of decades of radiation exposure slowly affecting the neural functioning of the town's residents. The term that fandom uses for the process of characters becoming more extreme versions of their defining traits, losing the complexity that originally made them interesting, is Flanderization. The name is taken from Ned Flanders himself because his transformation from a multi-dimensional character into a caricature of religious earnestness is so clear and so well documented that it became the example. The radiation theory proposes that Flanderization is not metaphorical but literal. The radiation is physically changing the brains of Springfield's residents, making them more impulsive, less capable of nuanced thought, more locked into their defining behavioral patterns. This is not medically accurate. Real radiation exposure does not work this way. It causes cancer and cellular damage and immune system compromise. It does not reduce human beings to exaggerations of their personality traits. But within the show's own logic, which has always been indifferent to scientific accuracy, the pattern fits. The plant leaks. The water is contaminated. The fish have extra eyes. The residents have yellow skin. And over time, the people become simpler and stranger and more extreme in their characteristics, as though whatever made them complex and real is slowly being eroded by something in the environment. Homer's exposure is the most severe because Homer works in the plant, is regularly doused in glowing waste, and has shown a remarkable and medically bewildering resistance to the kinds of injuries that should have incapacitated him long ago. He has survived falls, explosions, electrocutions, and an extraordinary number of blows to the head that should have caused permanent damage. The show plays this as a running gag about Homer's resilience. The theory frames it differently. Homer's body has adapted to radiation in a way that makes him more durable than a normal human, but also cognitively compromised in ways that compound over time. The children of Springfield, who were born into the already contaminated environment, carry the radiation's effects from birth. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie all have spiky or unusual hair growing directly from their scalps without the separation that human hair normally has from the skin. Their eyes are round and simplified. Their skin is the same yellow as everyone else in town. They were shaped by the environment before they had any choice about it. There is something uncomfortable in this reading when applied to the children, because it transforms what looks like a cartoon design convention into an image of children suffering from environmental contamination they cannot escape and did not choose. Lisa, in this reading, is not simply a gifted and unusual child. She is a gifted and unusual child whose body carries evidence of the same poisoning that has made her father increasingly less capable over time. Her intelligence coexists with the contamination. Whether it will eventually be eroded by it the way Homer's has been eroded is a question the theory raises without answering. The radiation theory is the most grounded of the Dark Springfield theories because it is the most supported by things the show itself has established. The plant really is run dangerously. The waste really is disposed of improperly. Blinky really exists. The characters really do look different from real human beings in ways that the show has never fully explained within its own storytelling. The behavioral drift really has happened over the course of the show's run. The theory is not offered as a comfort. It is the theory that asks what the true cost of living in Springfield might be. What has been paid over decades by people who simply went about their lives in a town where the biggest employer was quietly, continuously making everything worse. The yellow skin is the bill coming due. The simplified personalities are the accumulation of exposure over time. Springfield is not purgatory. Springfield is a town with a very bad nuclear plant, and the damage has been spreading since before the story began. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The radiation theory sits in plain sight, written into the skin and the water and the slow dimming of people who deserved better. But the show hid something darker still. Not in its colors or its backgrounds, but in the futures it planted quietly across decades, waiting for someone to look closely enough to find them. Section 9. The dark future the show is hiding in plain sight. The Simpsons does not typically announce its darkest moments. It tends to place them in the background of other things, in the margins of episodes that are ostensibly about something else, in the details that a distracted viewer would miss and a careful one would wish they had not found. The dark future of Springfield is not delivered in a dedicated apocalypse episode. It accumulates across decades of storytelling in images and implications that the show drops and then moves past without pausing to let them settle. The season 36 finale, A Stranger Things, is the most recent and most concentrated example of this tendency. The episode uses a flash forward to describe a future in which Marge is dead, Bart and Lisa have barely spoken in years, Moe's headstone shows he died by his own hand, and the family home has become a retirement house for elderly men who have nowhere better to go. This is the future the show described in its most recent flash-forward episode. Not a nuclear apocalypse or an alien invasion, but the quiet accumulation of loss over time. Marge is dead. Moe is dead. The family that the show was built around has dissolved into its component parts, each living separately, connected mainly by obligation and the shared memory of a woman who held them together. The details in that episode reward careful attention. Bart, who converted the family home into a kind of informal care facility, is not wealthy. He is living off the money Lisa sends, money she sends without visiting. Homer, now old and diminished, is comfortable in his son's care, but living in a version of the house that is not quite the house it was. Carl and Lenny are there too, because they have nowhere else to go. The men who formed the supporting social structure of Homer's life for 3 decades are now old men in a falling apart house. Lisa has become president of the rebranded Women's Basketball League in a future where the league structures have shifted and been renamed. She is successful. She is accomplished. She has done what Lisa Simpson was always going to do. She has become someone important in a world that finally organized itself in a direction she could support. But she has done it by leaving, by not coming home, by maintaining her connection to the family through financial transfer rather than physical presence. This is the specific sadness that the flash forward describes. Not death, not disaster, but the drift, the gradual, barely noticed process by which people who love each other stop finding the time, and the time becomes habit, and the habit becomes the relationship. Lisa did not stop loving her family. She just became someone whose life was elsewhere, and the distance calcified into something that felt like a wall, even when it was really just the accumulated weight of a lot of separate choices that each seemed reasonable at the time. The detail about Mo is placed in the background of Marge's cemetery scene with a specificity that required a decision from the writers. They could have not included it. A single grave for Marge, shown briefly in a montage, would have been enough to communicate what needed to be communicated. The choice to also show Mo's grave with the image of his head in an oven was deliberate. It means the writers wanted the viewer to understand that in this future, both Marge and Mo are gone, and that Mo's death came in the way that anyone who has followed his character expects it might have come. Mo Sislak was introduced in Season 1 as the grumpy proprietor of a tavern that Homer frequents. Over time, the show developed him into something more complicated and more affecting than a simple supporting character. Mo is lonely. He has always been lonely. The bar is not really a business for him. It is the structure around which his social existence is organized, the one place where he can guarantee that people will come and sit near him. When the bar is threatened in various episodes, the threat is not primarily financial, it is existential. Without the bar, Mo has nothing and no one. His depression has been a running thread through the show's storytelling for many seasons. He has referenced suicidal thoughts in ways that the show sometimes played as dark comedy and sometimes played with more directness. In Season 17's Simpsons Christmas Stories, Mo mentions that he tries to take his own life every holiday season. In Season 14's Mo Baby Blues, he is at a bridge ready to jump when Maggie accidentally falls and he catches her, which saves both of them in different senses. In Season 23's Whiskey Business, he puts a noose around his neck at the opening of the episode, coming very close before the plot pivots. The noose stays hanging in his office afterward. He keeps it there. The flash forward in A Stranger Things takes all of this accumulated characterization and gives it a final image. The headstone with the oven. The history of a man whose suffering was both visible and treated as part of the scenery, now given the ending that the show had been quietly building toward for years. The show did not announce this. It tucked it into a background detail in a cemetery scene during a flash-forward montage, and then it moved on. The dark future of Springfield is not one event. It is everything the show has been quietly accumulating. Marge, dead in her early 70s, which is not impossibly young, but is younger than the woman who held everything together deserved to be. Bart in the family home, older and scruffier, still the same in some fundamental way that is by now indistinguishable from being stuck. Lisa somewhere else, accomplished and alone in the specific way that accomplished and alone looks. Mo in a grave that says everything about who he was and how it ended. Homer, presumably still alive in that future, surrounded by old men in his son's care, in a house that used to be loud with children and is now just quiet. This is what the dark future looks like. Not a mushroom cloud, not the horsemen of the apocalypse, just time and what it does. The show has hidden this future in plain sight for years, distributing its pieces across flash-forward episodes and background gags and moments that a viewer watching for plot would not linger on. It takes a certain kind of attention to assemble the pieces into the image they form together. And the image they form is not comfortable. Springfield has survived everything. Every bomb and every rapture and every alien and every zombie. The one thing it cannot survive is the passage of time, which is not survivable, which no one survives, which the show has known all along and describes slowly, in pieces, across 3.5 decades of episodes that often looked like comedies. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The dark future was always there, assembled piece by piece, across decades of episodes most people watched without stopping. What comes next is not a theory about the future at all, but about a man who has been standing at the edge of the story for 35 years, telling the audience everything in plain sight the whole time. Section 10. The saddest theory of all. There is a theory about The Simpsons that does not require any knowledge of radiation or purgatory or comas to understand. It does not need flash-forward episodes or background details in cemetery scenes. It is sitting in plain sight in a bar on a street in a fictional town, and it has been there since the very first season. The theory is about Moe Szyslak, and it is the one that the show has been building most consistently and most honestly across its entire run. The theory is simple. Moe is the character who tells the most truth about what Springfield costs its residents, not through dark predictions or hidden meanings, through exactly what the show puts on screen every time Moe appears. He is unhappy. He has always been unhappy. The happiness that occasionally visits him, the moments when something works out, or someone is kind to him, or the bar is full of people who seem, for an evening, like friends. These moments are always temporary, and Moe knows they are temporary, which means he cannot fully surrender to them even while they are happening. He holds his happiness at a slight distance because he has learned that it does not stay. The bar is everything Moe has. This is established early in the show's run and never fundamentally changes. He does not have a satisfying romantic relationship that persists. He does not have a family of his own. He does not have accomplishments outside the bar that make him feel like his life has amounted to something. He has the bar, and he has the people who come to the bar, and he has the specific, limited comfort of being necessary in a very small way to a small number of people who do not always treat him well. Homer, his most regular patron and the person the show most consistently positions as Moe's friend, is not always a good friend to Moe. He takes Moe's company for granted. He has stolen Moe's ideas. He has benefited from Moe's generosity without fully registering what that generosity costs. This is not malicious on Homer's part. It is simply how Homer operates in all of his relationships, taking warmth where it is offered and not always accounting carefully for what it cost the person offering it. But for Moe, who has so little to give and who gives what he has anyway, Homer's casualness about their friendship is a source of genuine pain that the show has documented without always calling it by name. The prank calls are the other consistent thread of Moe's story, and the theory that exists around them is worth examining carefully. For most of the show's run, it appeared that Moe genuinely did not know that it was Bart making the prank calls. He would receive the call, ask around the bar for whoever the joke name described, be laughed at, and threaten violence. This was played as a running gag at Moe's expense, the bartender who keeps falling for the same kind of trick. But a fan theory proposed on Reddit years ago suggests that Moe has always known. The theory points to Moe's behavior across episodes, noting that when actual adults prank call him, his response is immediate and violent. When Fat Tony calls with a fake name, Moe does not play along. When Mr. Burns calls looking for Waylon Smithers and Moe thinks it is a prank, his reaction is sharp and angry. But when Bart calls, Moe always plays along. He always goes through the routine. He asks around the bar. He lets the joke happen. He gives the prank the room it needs to land. The theory suggests that Moe has known it is Bart from very early early on, and that he allows the calls to continue because he is, in his way, a lonely man who is fond of the boy and does not want to take away something that the kid clearly enjoys. Bart gets to feel clever, the bar gets a little noise and a little laughter, Moe gets a few minutes of contact with the outside world. The actor who voices Moe, Hank Azaria, was asked about this theory in an interview, and his response was immediate and definitive. He said that no, Moe genuinely does not know it is Bart, and that his lack of recognition is not strategy, but simple dim-wittedness. That is one version of the character, but the version that the fan theory describes, the one in which Moe knows and allows it anyway, is more interesting and more consistent with the deeper characterization the show built around him. A man who knows he is being mocked and allows it anyway, who values the contact more than his dignity, is a man in a very specific kind of pain. That pain is visible in Moe's character, whether or not the prank call theory is true. His loneliness is not occasional or circumstantial. It is the foundational condition of his life as the show describes it. Everything else, the bar, the customers, the occasional romantic hope that always collapses, is built on top of loneliness that does not go away when the bar is full or when something works out for an episode. It waits. The history of Moe's mental health across the show's storytelling is the darkest continuous thread in the entire series. Darker in a way than the Apocalypse episodes. Darker than the theories about Homer's coma or Springfield's purgatorial nature. Because it is not speculative. It is what the show put on screen. The suicidal ideation is not a background detail. It is stated dialogue, described action, visible behavior. Moe has stood on bridges. Moe has put nooses around his neck. Moe has kept the noose after the episode that introduced it, leaving it hanging in his office. Moe has told other characters that the holidays are when it is hardest for him. The show plays these moments as comedy. That is the show's approach. Take the darkest material and put it in a comedic register so that it can exist in the story without requiring the story to stop and address it directly. This is not dishonest about what it is doing. It is using comedy the way comedy has always been used at its most sophisticated. Not to pretend that the dark thing is not dark, but to make it possible to look at the dark thing without turning away. The season 36 flash forward, with Moe's grave in the background of Marge's cemetery scene, is the show finally giving that thread its honest conclusion. Not the comedic version where Moe fails at suicide and is redirected by a plot mechanism. Not the warm version where an episode ends with Moe feeling a little better and a CTA plays and everything is fine. The conclusion. The headstone with the image that says everything about who he was and how the story ended for him. The show did not linger on it. Of course it did not. The Simpsons does not linger. It places the detail in the background and moves on to the next scene, which is what the show has always done with Moe's pain. Acknowledge it and then continue. Because the story requires continuation and the world does not stop for grief, and neither does Springfield. But here is what the saddest theory of all actually says. It says that The Simpsons has been the story of a group of people, not just a family, but a whole town, for whom survival is not the same as flourishing. Springfield has survived everything. The bombs and the raptured and the aliens and the zombies and the decades. The characters have survived. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie have survived, reset, and started again more times than anyone could count. But survival and happiness are not the same thing, and the show has always known this. Moe survived for 35 years of episodes and ended up in a grave the show placed in the background of someone else's story, which is, in its way, a perfect description of who Moe always was in Springfield, a supporting character in other people's lives, present and necessary and never quite at the center of anything that mattered. The Simpsons is about a lot of things. It is about American family life and consumerism and politics and celebrity and the slow erosion of quality across decades of television. But it is also, underneath all of those things, about what it costs to stay. Springfield is the kind of place that people stay. They stay because leaving is hard and staying is familiar, and the bar is open and the neighbors know your name and your family is a short walk away. They stay even when staying wears them down, even when the environment is quietly harming them, even when the future the flash forwards describe is not the future they imagined. Mo stayed. He stayed until he did not. And the town goes on without him, the same way it went on after every other catastrophe, yellow-skinned and large-eyed and slightly reduced, but continuing, always continuing, in the particular Springfield way that looks like resilience, but might also be something simpler and sadder, not knowing how to stop. The apocalypse has visited Springfield many times. The bombs fell, and the raptured happened, and the zombies walked, and the aliens came, and the future arrived in pieces, grim and quiet and not what anyone hoped for. And the town survived all of it, which is either the most comforting thing about the show, or the question the show has been asking all along. What is survival really worth, and at what cost, and for whom? Springfield is still there. The lights are on at Moe's, even though Moe is gone in the futures the show has started to describe. Homer is still at the plant, or was, or will be, depending on which timeline is being consulted. Bart is still 10 years old in the eternal present of most episodes, still writing sentences on the chalkboard, still being impossible and lovable and slightly exhausting. Lisa is still playing saxophone. Marge is still blue-haired and worried and more capable than anyone around her fully acknowledges. They are all still there, and somewhere above them, in a spaceship that no one can see but everyone eventually recognizes, Kang and Kodos are watching, the way they have always been watching, patient and tentacled and present, recording everything without being changed by any of it. The Simpsons is not over. It will not be over for a long time. The stories it still has to tell exist in the futures the flash forwards have begun to describe, in the dark corners that the theories illuminate, in the moments the show drops into the background of other moments, and then leaves for the careful viewer to find. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.